Are you tired of spending your time and money chasing strategy after strategy only to discover what worked 10, 5, or even 2 years ago is not working now? Things shift fast in the online space, and if you're not keeping up, you're getting left behind. It's time for something different. Welcome to the Marketing, Media, and Money Podcast, where every single episode will be jam-packed with proven, profitable strategies, behind-the-scenes secrets, and what's working now resources from industry experts and global influencers to help you scale your business, shorten your learning curve, and stand out in a crowded, noisy marketplace. And now, your host, award-winning marketing and media strategist, and international speaker, Patty Farmer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Marketing, Media, and Money Podcast. I'm your host, Patty Farmer, and I'm looking forward to sharing today's industry expert with you. And let me tell you a little bit about him, because I think this is going to be a phenomenal show. You're going to want to make sure you have pen and paper handy so that you can take lots of notes. So let's just dive in. So Kevin West is known as the communication entrepreneur and the founder of Shut Up and Play Productions, as well as a veteran television guest star from such shows as Hawaii Five-0, Criminal Minds, and Lost, as well as an expert motivational and educational keynote speaker. Kevin's journey has taken him from the rural South in the late 60s to 30 plus years in Hollywood and 22 countries in between. He's penned 3 books, audio and video programs, and produced over 40 live events. Add in 4 LA marathons, a 6 handicap golfer, and there is no time for any moss to grow under his feet. But we did get him to come here so that we could ask him questions and he could serve the audience. So Kevin, thank you so much for being here with me today.
My absolute pleasure, Patty. Thanks for having me.
I love it. I have to tell you, that 6 handicap golfer thing for me was really interesting because my husband is a scratch golfer.
Oh.
And so I love it. I play golf myself. I'm really not very good, but I really like it. So I think that is really interesting. And it's really fun as a speaker when we travel around to get to try out different golf courses.
I'm already starting out 6 down. Dang. I'm six down to your husband. I haven't even gotten off the first tee yet. I used to be a scratch golfer a long time ago.
I think it's kind of fun. His dad was a scratch golfer too and wanted him to be a golfer by trade. He ended up not. He's an aviation engineer instead, but hey, it's all good. It's all good.
That's what I wanted to be as well. But as I like to say, I was good enough to know how good I wasn't. And so sometimes you have to move on and do something else.
I think that's actually true for a lot of things, right? So I think sometimes it is important to know what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what things you should outsource, what you should be doing yourself. And I always like to say, I like to work in my brilliance and outsource everything else so that they can work in theirs.
And it took me, I think, I'm going to go, Patty, it took me 30 years to truly understand what that meant based on the way that I grew up. It probably would be one of the absolute failings in my life to lead to a journey of success, would be realizing that it's not even a matter of being a jack of all trades and a master of none. It's a matter of understanding that what is your brilliance, what are you really good at versus what you can get someone else to do, even though maybe you could do it yourself, but it's going to slow down what I consider, my name is Kevin E. West. I now say that my middle initial is E for efficiency. So the brilliance part is what you get to be really efficient and good at as opposed to everything else.
I actually love that. It's so funny because I was going to tell you that I thought the E stood for expert because my husband sometimes says, are you talking to yourself? And I'm like, sometimes I have to talk to an expert, right? And so it's kind of funny, right? But thank goodness people see people talking in their car now and they think they're, talking or listening to a podcast or doing something like that. And for me, it's really that I'm probably talking to myself.
Oh, that's you too? Cool.
I practice my speeches and everything in the car, some of my best stuff. And sometimes when I'm in the car and I know I'm going to be doing it, I literally even record myself.
Absolutely. Are you kidding me? I used to talk to myself when I was a kid. My mom said, people are going to think you're crazy. And I looked at her and I go, and your point is? And then I eventually became an actor. So there you go.
Absolutely. But, sometimes when you're in the car, you're by yourself and you either think it or you say it out loud. And then when you go home and try to write it down, you think, man, it's not quite as good as it was in the car. And so that's why I record myself. Sometimes I could record myself on a half-hour drive. I'll only get 2 sentences out of it that I think is actually usable, but that's okay because those were 2 sentences I didn't have before.
Yeah, but Patty, it's genius. I mean, again, this is not really in my bio. We didn't really discuss it, but I spent a couple of years being a stand-up comic, and that is a stand-up comic's life. All you're doing is constantly writing down notes. So just like you, I had one of those old recorders. We have our phone now. It's much easier, technology land, but I carried that little recorder in my car around all the time. And that's exactly correct. It doesn't matter what you're putting out of yourself. The efficiency in the editing version of it is how great it is that you're able to get 2 sentences out of it. That's awesome.
That's what I think too. And now they have so many tools. So I use Otter. My audience always loves when we say, what's the tool, right? So otter.io really works for me because then I don't have to even listen to it again. It just emails me and transcribes it for me. And then I can just look at it and go, oh yeah, this line's good and this line's good, and then delete the rest of it. So I think it is one of my best friends. So I love it.
It's outstanding.
So let's dive in. And I know that, man, you have quite the list of experience and a lot of things. I really love the fact that 30 plus years in Hollywood, 22 countries though. I really like that. I have been quite a traveler myself as an international speaker. And I have to tell you, I really love it. The next 3 places I get to go to are Croatia, Switzerland, and Norway. So I'm super excited about that. I spent a month in Italy not that long ago. So I think travel is really big for me, but 22 countries, that's pretty impressive. Of all those countries, what were your favorite 2?
My favorite, well, funny you said Croatia. I've been to Dubrovnik and it was amazing. So you by all means do look forward to that. I'm jealous I haven't been to Norway yet, but my current favorite city is Prague. But I went to Prague a long time ago, but I have such a list of the places that I'd like to go. I'll save Prague for now. Maybe New Zealand will wind up being the favorite place that I go eventually, although I've not been there. But without question, I have been to Prague as number 1. And then I went to Kiev some years ago where I actually spoke as well. And it was just interesting because of the history of it. And I have several Russian friends in Los Angeles. And so Kiev and Prague were quite interesting for me. But I have such a long list, just like you, that internationally I hope I get to spend time doing for sure.
Ooh, that sounds good. Just for the record, Greece and New Zealand are on the top 2 list for me of next places to go. It was Italy all the way, but now that I've been there, I can't wait to go back. But Greece and New Zealand are right now on the top of my list.
I am so jealous. Sorry. Your husband's a scratch golfer and now you have Greece and New Zealand. I'm way behind.
But Kevin, wouldn't you say that as a speaker, that's one of the greatest things is that if you love to travel, if it's something that you love to do, and you're an international speaker, I love that I get to go and travel the world on somebody else's dime. But then
Absolutely.
I get to take extra days so that I can see it too. So I really love that. And I've got to go to some really exciting places. So that has really helped me. I think it's really great when you can take something you really love to do, and combine it with something that you do for business that you also love to do. So it's like a perfect marriage, right?
It is. That's one of the reasons why I'm a speaker. And I think it's probably one of the reasons why I've been a performer a great deal of my life, but also to the point of your brilliance, why I am also choosing to expand my horizons. I don't want to say terminate. I mean, I just finished doing a show for HBO, so I'm still very much an active actor, but the speaker part of my life, which I've done predominantly for showbiz, but now I'm doing in corporate America, is simply because, art imitates life. And I have a strong philosophy, Patty, that any form of communication, no matter how short, simple, or how complex, that we are all storytellers. And when you look at communication, it doesn't matter what mechanism or device or what language you're speaking. Communication matters globally. So the more you travel, and I think the better you understand that we are in a lot of ways all the same, it makes us better communicators in our small business. It makes us better communicators with our employees. I think traveling and experiential levels like that are only things that help us in terms of our efficiency and our communication and our success.
I totally agree with you. And I love that you mentioned storytelling, because I think that as communications, we all love stories, right? And as a speaker, we know that to be true, and how successful it can help us to be by being a good storyteller. And I know that when I became a speaker 10 years ago, I don't want to say struggled with it, but I was having to work a little bit harder in how to do it, what was I willing to share, that type of thing. It's so easy in my personal life, but when I was on a stage with a microphone in my hand, I wasn't quite sure at first. I warmed up to it pretty fast, but in the beginning, I remember it was one of the hardest things for me. I also think it is one of the most important things, and it is a great way to communicate. So here's a question. Do you find that when you're speaking from the stage, or when you're doing some of your acting that you do, which one is easier for you to communicate?
It's probably easier for me to communicate from the stage, simply because I am the person who chose the content. I'm a big person on the core truth and the core answer from the internal part of yourself, Patty. And I think that all communication comes from the standpoint of being, the 3-year-old, 4-year-old boy who goes, why is the sky blue? I think the question why matters a great deal. And so when you have a chance to speak on stage, I've created that presentation. I'm the one who's put that together. Our job as an actor is to take somebody else's dialogue and turn that into something that you believe, I believe. So there's a slight leap there that involves, a technique that is something we have to learn. So I'm certainly, it's not a matter of comfortability. I'm comfortable in both, but speaking from the stage was something I've done for a long, long time. Has a joy to it that even doing it on camera just can't be matched.
If somebody decided that as a business owner or an entrepreneur that they wanted to become a speaker, now sometimes I hear speakers tell their story and it was that it took them a while to break in, right? And I have heard some people say that they broke in right away, right? And it became very, very easy for them. What would you say are some of the tips that you would give someone if that's what they decided they wanted to do? What are some of the very first things you think they should do?
Well, to me, the basis of being a good speaker is going to, come down to really two basic things. And you just said that 10 years ago when you started, it wasn't a struggle for you for long because obviously you're a personable person, but you have two P's that come to mind, which is presence and program. And there are a lot of people, and again, I have a running joke, Patty, that I say in my life that I don't mean in a bad way, but it's just one of those things that just because something's possible doesn't make it a good idea. And choosing to be a speaker or wanting to be a speaker, just like being an actor, is one of those things that technically, to say you want to do it, doesn't have an entry barrier. You just go, oh, this is something I like to do. Hey, you're funny, go be a stand-up. But there's a lot more to it. So learning the stage presence as being a speaker is one giant mountain for a lot of people. And the other, obviously, is the program. What is it you're going to choose to speak about? And again, Kevin's going to put underneath that a very strong why. I'm going to put a question mark to you all day long about what it is you're speaking about and why, because at the end of the day, you can get good on stage with your presence, but you still have to present a program.
Well, I think that's very interesting. And I love thinking about it from that perspective. What area or areas do you think a keynote speaker would struggle with beyond just knowing what their program?
Oh, I think we struggle mostly on stage. And again, it varies because obviously, as you well know, Patty, if you speak enough, the stage dimensions that you'll wind up doing as to whether or not there's a camera, there isn't a camera. Are you working with a handheld mic? Do you have a headset mic on? I think the physicality of speaking is what is most difficult for people, or what I would call unmotivated movement or erratic movement that is not tied to you telling a story, because that is what you're doing. So physical presence with a camera, it does make a little bit of a difference. But if you're just simply moving for the sake of moving, and some people get away with this who are highly paid speakers or successful or well known. But when you first start out, your movement or lack of movement does actually speak for you while you're speaking. And it's one of the toughest things to learn as to why you choose to move when you move based on your program and what you're saying. Some of it's intrinsic, some of it's natural, but being able to be very poignant about your movement on stage, I think, is probably one of the most difficult mountains to climb when you first start being a speaker. Listen, I think you know this, Patty, but they do surveys and people say, what scares you more than death? And commonly public speaking is the answer. So it's tough on people.
Absolutely. I remember that when I became a speaker, when I made that decision that I was going to utilize speaking as a marketing strategy, I just wanted to be really good at it. So I hired a speaker coach. And I remember of all the things that we talked about, I remember her really, really honing in on that story, but also in how you tell it from a stage and when you know to stop, when you lower your voice a little, when you know, really when you're getting to like the climax of the story, like what are the different things? And I thought to myself, wow, I never realized that there were techniques. But I have to tell you, I remember now every single time I hear a speaker, like I can still hear her voice, and I've been speaking for 10 years now, but I still love it when I listen to someone and, you know, their speech is good, right? But I'm thinking to myself, oh, I love the way they did that right there, right? Because then it becomes about technique and we recognize them in each other, right? When we're hearing it. So it's like, wow, that was really good. I love the way they did that right here, which is a lot why people do TEDx, right? Because they really, really teach you a lot of things about TEDx. I actually have a client who did a TEDx talk, like our very second talk. It was just, she just happened to be an expert at something that was really happening right then, because, you know, they always have a theme.
Absolutely.
And she was phenomenal at it. But boy, the process of going through it with her to get her ready was super interesting. And so I thought to myself, oh, wow, you know, they really do coach you good. And I think that's actually really a good thing, because I think that when someone first becomes a speaker, not always are they recorded right away. You know, a lot of times people, when they're first starting, you know, they're speaking for free, or, you know, so they're just speaking in front of people and honing their skill there. That wasn't my case, though. I mean, they threw me in front of a video day one. Day one.
Straight out to the lines. Here you go, Patty. Go ahead.
Oh, no, actually, it was even more than that. It's kind of an interesting thing. You would be like, oh, my goodness. I kept saying I didn't want to do it. And then a friend of mine called me up and said, Patty, we had somebody who couldn't come. You know, we really need you to, you know, step up here and talk about, you know, a topic that I know you really know. Could you please do this for me as a favor? I said, no. And then I ended up doing it. And then she told me the day of, oh, by the way, Patty, I need you to talk for 60 minutes instead of 30 minutes. And you need to be funny, and we're going to video you. I was like, what? I mean, that was like my very first speaking attempt. And I thought, wow, like it was like crazy. I thought I was going to die, right? Instead, I just got sick. But but after that, I thought, oh, I'm going to learn to be really, really good at this, right? You know, that was like, in a way, it was really good, because then I was like, oh no, if this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to hone my craft just like I do everything else. And I decided I was going to become an exceptional speaker, which is going to kind of lead into what I kind of want to talk about in a way, because I think what happens is a lot of times we see speakers, we hear speakers, and we think, oh my goodness, that's what I have to do to be a speaker. Because I'm going to tell you, I think if there's anything I would look back on and wish I would have done differently, is that it took me probably 3 months. So, I mean, it was only 3 months, right? But it took me 3 months of agonizing over how I felt I needed to change me to be like them. I kept thinking to myself, I am just not this eloquent, wear a soap opera dress, like I call them, right? That just wasn't who I was. And I just didn't feel like I could be that. And then all of a sudden, somebody said to me one time, it was just kind of a speaker just was having a conversation, and they said, it isn't changing you to speak like someone else. It's speaking in front of audiences that need to hear it the way you say it. And that was a game changer for me, right? And I think it's also the reason why when people talk to me and they meet me, they'll say, you know what, Patty, you're exactly the same on your podcast, on social media, on the stage. When we meet you, you're exactly the same. Like I knew that's how you were going to be, and that's how you were. And I think as a speaker, that's a good thing, right? So I'm glad it only took 3 months.
That's, listen, Patty, that's a pretty short period of time, because certainly I'm the same way. If you were to come hear me speak, you would get a very similar sense that you would get from listening to me on this. But it's also, again, taking my background just for the years that I've spent in Hollywood in front of a camera, but I also was a stand-up. It's the same thing. You can't be like somebody else as a comic. You can't be like somebody else as an actor. You have to be you. You have your instrument. You have to function with what you're working with and present it, because there's all kind of ways to make people laugh. And there's all kinds of ways to tell a story. And there is an audience for how you, Patty Farmer, or how me, Kevin E. West, tell a story, whatever that program may be. And if you're busy trying to be somebody else, and that's where that physical movement comes in. Also the wardrobe. You just said a huge thing. I mean, I know you know this, it's your podcast, but you just said a huge thing. It's one thing to dress for your audience, but you have to dress for your audience and for yourself. It can't just be for one, because if you are not comfortable in literally your own skin and your own clothes, standing on a stage with a program, then unfortunately there is a non sequitur disconnect in the way something will emanate from you as a speaker. And I know you know this, but it's something that can take people sometimes a long time to learn. And unfortunately, as you also well know, sometimes folks never learn it.
That is so true. And I love that as the communication entrepreneur that we're going to get to talk about this today, and we're going to get to talk about speaking too. But what do you think happens sometimes in this type of thing in communication when they put the camera on? Because, there's on camera and there's off camera, right? It's just like when people do video now too, right? But what are some on-camera tips when you know your presentation's being recorded? What are some tips you could give someone that, might make it a little bit easier to transition into that?
Well, you have the camera awareness, obviously, is the huge part. Again, there could be one camera, there could be two, there could be three. So, whether or not they've flanked the stage with camera left, camera right, center has a lot to do with it. But when you discuss speaking, and let's just pretend for the moment, Patty, you have one on you. It's an easier place to learn from, or from a perspective of doing a podcast. We sometimes want to feel like that we're too aware of the camera watching us. That's just a part of doing this initially. But actually, once you get really good at it, you're completely comfortable with knowing that the camera is watching you. But we want to do something when you're trying to make a poignant moment and you're doing it on camera, depending on where the camera is, how close it is in height from where you're standing to where the camera height is to where your audience's eyes are. You sometimes have to look up higher, or maybe somebody who's back closer to where the camera is settled, as if they were right in front of you. And if you want to make a poignant moment, similar to body movement when you're telling a story, you have to just get really used to you don't have to break the fourth wall, but just that if you feel like you're looking at the camera from a long way away, you don't have to look way off left or way off right to have it see your face. You just look just off the camera. We have barn doors and cameras in acting, so it's maybe 3 or 4 inches from either side of the camera. And that, for me, becomes somebody's eyes that I'm speaking to. And those are for the poignant moments when you're on stage and that you're on camera, where you want to make sure that piece of camera that you're going to get that video, wherever it's going to go, that the person watching, you aren't staring them down through the fourth wall, but your eyes are close enough to that camera edge that they do feel like it's directly connecting to them, the viewing audience. And again, this is why movement, and I'm one of those guys that, you could say I have that restless leg syndrome thing, Patty. I can bounce my leg all day long. But if you get me on stage or get me in front of a camera, when I need to stop and settle, I will stop and settle. And I'm doing this audibly with you now, but that's part of what it is, so that your eyes aren't beating around the camera. They have to settle and focus on one side or the other when you're trying to make a point.
I think that's really important. And as a speaker, there's multiple models of speaking, just like there is in a lot of things, right? But when someone is a speaker who is also an entrepreneur, meaning that they're not a professional speaker and that's the only thing they do, they get paid to speak and that is it. There's also speakers where we are educational, right? We're entrepreneurs. There's other things we do, right? And we speak as a business, right? So when you're an entrepreneur and a speaker, like I am and you are, right? Learning to maximize on stage and off stage when you are communicating, I think also can help you with clients or potential clients when you're closing sales, right? Even with a prospective employee, if you are in corporate, and I know some of the people who are listening here are business owners. So what are some of the principles that you think as a speaker we need to know so that when we have that skill and we're communicating, that we're able to do it on stage, off stage, no matter who we're talking to? Communication is so important, whether you're on stage or off.
Oh, for me, it's everything. And Patty, we if you stop and think about it, we currently communicate globally every single moment of every single day more than we ever have in history. When you look at all the devices and all the ways that we go about communicating, and it is crazy town out there with regards to communication. And I think that a lot of the challenges, and I was an employer, you've been one. One of the challenges is that do you really take the time to briefly understand who you're talking to? And this again is one of those big principles as an actor: is who am I talking to? And we look at industries, we look at sectors sometimes, Patty, whether it's an employer, whether it's your business, and we look at something like sales. But, with all due respect, if you're selling a financial product, or you're selling a widget that goes into someone's machine, or you're selling real estate, those three things may be sales. But if you don't understand, and again, I'm going to say it again, if you don't understand the story that you're telling when you're talking to an employee or a potential customer, if you don't truly understand the story you're telling, and you just try to brushstroke it into all of those industries just because somebody said it's sales, then there's a decent chance that whether you're on stage or whether you're across a conference table or across a coffee, there's a solid chance that your customer, your audience at that moment, is going to have a sense of disconnect from you. And I think it's something that we try to rubber stamp a lot of things. And I just think a lot of sales or individual communication, especially intra-office, intra-employee, when you can brushstroke a memo, but brushstroking a conversation about certain areas and certain aspects is in general one of the biggest communication mistakes I see small business owners make. And it's something that I had to learn too. Just like I didn't plan on being a small business owner, it just happened. And I learned all along the way for 2+ decades.
Is that what you mean when you're talking about, I love this word that you're saying, the E stands for efficiency. So when you're talking about communication efficiency, what are some of the things that you mean? Can you break that down a little bit for us? And what does that actually mean? Because I don't think that's like a term somebody would say, right? Communication efficiency. But yet, when I take the two things separately and put them together, it makes perfect sense to me. So why don't you kind of give me your philosophy on that? And what are some of the things that you like to teach people to do to be really good at it?
Sure. Well, one of the things I tend to say, and I do this in my speaker program that's entitled Inception, because I'm a big person I'm always about the core and the evolution and the organic part of something. One of the things I say to people is, listen, I believe, Patty, that people say what they mean all the time. They just don't necessarily mean what they say. And when we say that in life, someone thinks, oh, well, it means you're lying. I'm like, no, I'm not discussing lying. I'm just saying that you didn't really actually say all of what you meant. And when you break that down, it comes from an internal conversation of, I define efficient communication by the number of questions that somebody has to ask you back to make sure they clarify or understand what you mean, shows you how much you've left out of your initial communication. And a lot of what happens to us, we make this very common phrase now, Patty, called taking selfies. And I realized one day that when you think about all the things that we do, and we're doing it right now, technology, a podcast, not face to face, and the things that we do through technology, like taking a selfie, I realized a selfie is actually really true in communication, except I just spell mine differently. It's not F-I-E, it's F-E-E, because a lot of what affects our communication are fear, ego, and envy. And if you stop and hold on that for just a moment and think about yourself as a human being, because we're all humans, one of the ways that efficient communication gets broken and or doesn't even start from the right place, and I'm talking moment to moment in an office, or even when you have time to think about something, it's potentially because you're not aware that you're about to communicate from a place of fear, depending on your disposition, your ego, depending on your attitude, or your envy, depending on who you're around. And that's a lot. We start looking back, and then we have to just do it by the communication moments that we've had recently. You can't probably go too far back, but recently, even the most simple ways of something that seemed like it took 3 extra conversations to have or 4 extra texts, if you look at it, you might realize, oh, yeah, FEE, the fee I paid there was either based on fear, ego, or envy. That's one way that I back end into being an efficient communicator. And we're human, so we all do it.
Do you think it also happens on the person who's receiving, or is it only with the person who's doing the upfront talking?
Oh, gosh, no. It's two-way. That's why when you look an exchange between two people and you see, if I were to take an email thread or a text thread and start to finish, and I could just point out, and I could probably even guess based on what's being said, which person is functioning from which place at which time, based on just simply the questions that got asked, the statements that got made, and why it had to keep going. And again, I'm just an efficiency person. I mean, none of us want to have something go on longer than it needs to be. Most of us don't want to have to take conversations home with us for the weekend. So it's interesting, as an artist and a Pisces and a goofball, which I am, how much this has become a thing of mine, because sometimes conversations are complex and sometimes they're very simple. And I make a joke that I can overthink shampoo directions, but I'd really prefer not to. So no, it happens. It's definitely a two-way street, and it gets even tougher when you start discussing performance teams, groups, small caucuses in an office that are set aside to do a project. You get 4, 5, 6, 7 people involved in this, and a bunch of email threads and text threads. Whoo! It becomes a very inefficient process, mostly related to those three things: the fee that we pay out of fear, ego, and envy.
I find that very interesting, but I think that if you could master that, those conversations that you're having with, well, really with anybody, but specifically in this conversation with a potential client, right? I mean, that really is going to help you get from A to B or Z, whichever case you want to talk about, right, faster, right? Because knowing, if you could recognize that, it's kind of like, remember back in the, I don't want to say old days, but remember when DISC first came out, right? That was like the first one, right? And the whole thing was like, oh, if you did DISC and you knew which one you were, and you could get really good at it, and you could recognize who the person was that you're having the conversation, how much easier that would be for communication. And since then, there's been just so many of them since then. There's a lot of, strength finders, wealth dynamics, a lot of different ones since then, but still the premise is the same, which is recognizing what you are and being able to recognize what they are. And then how does that change your communication in the conversation to get you both where that conversation needs to go? I find that very, very interesting. I have always been, for myself, one of the things that I have always, I don't want to say struggled with, it's really everybody else's struggle. So I guess that really is true. But I always say more words. My husband says that I have to paint the trees and stuff. And so I always say, and it is true too, though. So it is true. And as a speaker, whenever I do my speeches, then I always have to go through and say, okay, here's all the strikeout of all the words that I don't have to say. But it is true because I think that way. And then I have to go back and go, okay, so let's be a little bit more efficient, right? But that stemmed from somebody telling me when I first became a speaker, like sometimes people are mean, right? They're mean. And somebody said to me early on and said, Patty, can I give you some advice? And actually now when people usually say that, I usually say no. But because I usually know that means it's not going to be nice. But she said to me, I'll never forget it. It could have wiped me out, actually. She said, Patty, it is disrespectful. That's such a tough word. It is disrespectful for you to take 10 minutes to say something you should have been able to say in 5. And I remember at the time, actually, I think when I got home, I shed a few tears even, but I was so upset over that. I was like, wow, that was like so mean. I thought disrespectful. I was like, that was kind of a strong word. But I went back and I thought to myself, it's a good thing I was farther along in my speaker journey then, because that literally could have wiped me out. But it didn't. But I do recognize sometimes, and even my husband, we actually have a code word when I'm going there. And then he'll actually say the code word, and then we always start laughing. And I'm like, I did it again. And he's like, it's okay, babe, if you really, but I have a tendency to do it. And I know I have a tendency to do it. I've gotten really good at not doing it when I'm on the stage. But the people in my personal life, my friends and stuff, we know. And we have this word that's called anyways. And I got to tell you, if you say to somebody anyways, they'll be like, oh, yeah. And then they move on with the story. It's kind of amazing. Little tip there. But
it is. And Patty, I'm the same. I mean, I people who know me well, I am a walking contradiction in a lot of ways. And there's simply nothing that I can do about it. I can go on and be extremely verbose, but I'm also an extremely direct person. And when it comes to communication, if you're chatting with your husband or chatting with your friends, it's one thing. But if you're trying to communicate on a text thread or an email thread with a potential customer or client who you don't know personally, then those extra words not only can cause a problem or cause confusion and chaos, which is my big thing about efficient communication, it can flat out simply offend or lose you someone. So I am an advocate when it comes to business communication, for sure, that you try to say something as swiftly and as efficiently as possible and make sure that you're crystal clear. And I just don't think that we tend to write. We say it more often, but we don't write it. And so much of our communication now for the last 10 years or so is predicated on actually typing a text or typing an email. We don't use enough disclaimers and qualifiers. And we
don't even use good grammar.
No.
I mean, when people are texting, everybody thinks an emoji is good enough and they say very few words. And sometimes you can really take that wrong, and it's just because they're busy. And so they just answer your question quickly. Yeah, the text thing is,
so
that
dangerous.
could be a whole nother conversation. But what I'm loving about this conversation, though, is really when you're talking about communication, it sounds like the key here is recognizing in yourself, which you are, and then knowing when it is appropriate. Because I know for me that I wear a lot of hats, and I know that some of the things that I do in my personal life, when I can go on and on about a story, but as soon as I am working, like if I'm coaching a client, like I have a different hat on. And so my mind just automatically knows that when I'm talking to my friends, it's okay that we want to go on and on about a story, right? But sometimes it's just not appropriate. But I learned it actually on my own. But I think that what you're saying is having somebody be able to help you if you haven't, because the reality really is, if you lose, like you said, a potential client or in a conversation or text or email thread, and you lose the deal, it could cost you time, money, resources, energy. I mean, a lot of different things, and learning how to get it right early on seems very, very important to me.
Oh, I mean, Patty, you've learned it. It's changed your life. I'm sharing with you that, what you're doing part of my speaker program, by the way.
Okay.
No, it's funny. It was funny when you're saying the emojis and the shortened and grammar and that sort of thing. But I have 3 incontrovertible truths about communication that I've learned in my life, and they're not hard to understand. One is, that communication errors, human error in communication is inevitable, but for the most part, preventable. It is. Communication protocol that's efficient is universal. This is part of the traveling part that we've talked about. It doesn't matter where you are. Everyone struggles with the same thing in every language in all the countries. And number 3, communication errors are extremely expensive. And there's a different way to look at what that expensive is from day to day and from one's own life to one's own business or one's own profession or one's job. But you just said it. You learned it. But if you slowly but surely get this down, it literally changes your life. And that is the sole core reason why I am a communication corporate keynote speaker today. That right there. I simply want people to be more efficient, spend less time. I'm not even getting out into one's personal life in this way. It is just the business part of your life. As a guy who started a small business by accident and ran it for 23 and a half years, and also someone who's worked in retail, worked in corporate, worked in a law firm like you, I've worn a lot of hats and done a lot of different things. I've been around a lot of different types of people. At the end of the day, if you learn it, it works for all of them.
What I think I love most about it is when you think about a storyteller, right? And then you think about communication, and then you think about efficiency, right? It's kind of like, which word doesn't fit, right? I mean, that could be a multiple choice. Which word doesn't fit with a speaker, right? So it's kind of funny when I think about it, but I can see how important it would be. And depending upon what type of a speaker someone chooses to be, I mean, from a keynote speaker to a motivational speaker to, a corporate speaker, somebody who does sales training, all those different things, to somebody who has something that they're selling from the stage. Being efficient and using your communication well equals sales, equals money, right? And I mean, I think that those things are really important, but just knowing how to do it, I think is really, really important. The thing is, I don't think it's not something you go to the library and check out a book, right? So you really do have to learn it. So who are the type of people you work with the most. So tell us a little bit about what some examples of your clients.
I have mostly worked with performers or artists who are trying to, and this is the irony, because again, it applies to any industry, who are trying to go from just one part of the industry into actually, this is huge now, into making their own content, whether you're discussing influencers or whether you're discussing performers. But I've also worked with the two sides that I tend to work with are either that or executives who have a set of employees. I have several friends who are in sales, mutual funds, marketing, and I talk to them all the time about corporate America. You know what their favorite, I know you know this, Patty, their favorite phrase about corporate America, I almost fell down when someone told me this. They said their favorite problem about corporate America is that they do things by ready, fire, aim. And I'm like, what? Ready, fire, aim? Who does that? And they're like, everybody. And I said, what do you mean, everybody? They go, yeah. They tend to just go, okay, we think we're ready and we're just going to do this. And what are we shooting at? And so that same problem, and this is why I don't discern a lot between, I know Hollywood is good fodder, and I get that why people who are not a part of Hollywood like to make fun of Hollywood. I completely understand it. I've been here for a while. But at the same time, I see actors, performers, and writers make the mistake. And I also see extremely educated, highly academic, highly intelligent people who make a ton of money in corporate America do the same thing. And it's commonly cart before the horse. It's commonly, focusing. I do a thing about pitch decks in my speaker program, that if you can present and come up with great pitch decks, who's going to execute it? How does it get done? And so I'm a how's it get done guy. It's like, you have a car and you got gas in it. We're going to drive across the country. Okay. How would you like to do that? And so the execution part, again, that's the E in it's funny because the middle initial, which is my name, it's expert, efficiency, execution. That's what I wind up working with, is I wind up working with high-end corporate people who have a number of people underneath them, or I wind up working with the individual, whether it's a small business owner or whether it's a performer who's trying to expand out into self-creating something, even if it's just a project. Like I said, I've produced 42 live events. Man, those are a nightmare from an execution communication standpoint. So that's what I wind up working with based on what I have done in my life.
I love that. I have actually put on quite a few, over 100 events myself. Oh. I don't just produce them, but I actually market them too. People hire me to market their events. And you're right. Sometimes communication is so key there all across the board. So I really love that. So Kevin, how can people connect with you if they want to learn more?
Oh, just go to my website, kevinewest.com. The middle initials E as in expert, you said, or efficiency? Yes, kevinewest.com. Simple as that.
I love that. And you came bearing gifts, and I love that too. So Kevin, tell us a little bit about your gift you have to my audience.
Oh, I have a efficiency communication assessment, 20-minute gift that I'd love to give the first 20 listeners of the show. I'm happy to do it. Characterize and assess a particular recent situation or workplace example, identify an area of your business or company that struggles a lot with efficient communication. And sometimes this is not just, we think sometimes this has to do with just your employees, but sometimes, as you well know, Patty, your business partner may be your spouse, and dealing with that difference between those two things. So I'm more than happy to give an efficiency communication assessment. Love it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And now we're at the portion of the show that I like to call #OpenMic, where I hand the mic over to our guest and I ask you to share your number one marketing, media, and money strategy.
My number one strategy, Patty, is the core of why I speak, and it is the organic journey of communication, and that is entitled Audience, Environment, and Intent, AEI. And per what we were discussing earlier, everything in life happens off of these three things: who you're talking to, where you are at the time of the conversation, and your intent within that conversation. I make a joke all the time that I can say the exact same thing to one set of people in one particular place with an intent and get a laugh. I could say the exact same thing someplace else to a different set of people, and I might have a hard time getting to my car safely. So the organic journey of communication for me has always been about understanding who your audience is, whether it's 1 or 1,000, your environment, whether it's a stage or an elevator, and your intent, whether or not you're trying to make somebody understand something, convince somebody of something, or have somebody like something or have a good idea about it. That is the core actionable thing that is the premise for everything that I speak about in communication: audience, environment, and intent, the organic journey of communication.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Kevin, for being here with us today. It was quite an eye-opening experience. You really shed light on some things that I think people don't really think about, especially speakers, right? Communication is so important. And I think a lot of times they don't always think about those things and how they can be more efficient with it. So I really love it. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Patty, a complete pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us on the Marketing, Media, and Money podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and review the podcast on your favorite listening platform. Make sure to join us on Facebook in the Marketing, Media, and Money Facebook group. Make sure you jump in and join the conversation with our guests and our writers of our sister publication, the Marketing, Media, and Money magazine. I hope everyone is having a great day, a phenomenal day. And just remember that if it's not phenomenal, you have the power to change it.
Thank you for joining us today on the Marketing, Media, and Money podcast. To shorten your learning curve even more, make sure to grab your free copy of the Marketing, Media, and Money magazine at www.marketingmediamoney.com. I promise your business will thank you.